Okay. Look at these three areas that I have here. What you're seeing is at the top is the thesis. No matter what you are doing with your speech, you are always taking it back to the thesis. If your thesis is about clothing, proper attire in the workplace, then you shouldn't be talking to us about hair. You shouldn't be talking to us about a car. You should keep it at your thesis. Well, what you're doing right now is working on a main point. And in the discussion board, I have asked you to summarize your source. Not to spell it out word for word, but what's the information that you are going to use out of that source. Once you summarize the source and you really pull out the information that you want to use for your speech, then think about the main point. A really good main point is not just the summary of your source, the textbook, whatever, but it is an example, it's supporting material, and it's your additional sources that you have. So let's say you're summarizing information out of the text, which is what you're supposed to do, but then you add your source to it. Okay, so how does your source that you go and find, whether it's a book, a journal article, an interview with somebody, a magazine, a television show like 2020, 60 Minutes, everything should connect to your main point, and then that main point should connect to the thesis. So let's just say that I was going to talk to you about communication. Let's say communication and power, maybe. And I said, according to the textbook, it states that communication is a process. One example they give of a process, and that we talked about in class, was the car, that a car has a lot of parts to it and everything has to function. For the key to turn the vehicle on, you have to have all of this. And okay, so you have the summary of the text. Now, let's say that now you're going to add your source to it. So my source might be a book that's titled Communication Power. And this book, Communication Power, I'm reading right now, and it's by Manuel Castells. And in Manuel Castells' book, he talks about communication as a process, which is interesting because that complements what we talked about in class. But what he also adds in a component to that process that we didn't add is that communication is power, and it's networked power. So he says that we create power as a society because of being networked with one another, LinkedIn, Facebook. So he has, in essence, added another component to the process of communication, but specifically talking about power. Okay? So let's assume that my main point is about communication and power. So then what I've told you is, what does the textbook have to say about communication? The textbook doesn't necessarily say anything about power. So what I do is, with the source that I bring in, is I cite the source, C-I-T-E, I tell you the name of the book, the name of the author, and I tell you the particular part that has to do with power. Now, let's say that I was in my main point, I'm talking about the text, I'm talking about my source. Let's say I want to come up with a really good example. Maybe, well, not maybe, but I do have a friend that works from home. And she's home a lot. She has 3 children. But one way that she stays connected with her job is through LinkedIn, and then within her job, they have an IMing system. So if she's on her computer doing work, one of her colleagues can IM her, email. They have an internal blog themselves where they can connect with each other, and then socially she has that as well. And through that, she finds power within her job that she does at home by herself. Okay, so now my main point is about communication and power. I summarized what the text said. I talked about my specific source, which was a book, and I'm looking at it right now. And then I gave an example. These elements make up a good main point. So your main point just shouldn't be a summary of the textbook. It should be the textbook, the source, an example. And your specific source that you find from the library doesn't have to say the same thing that your textbook says. Notice, I provided information in my source that wasn't in the text, and that's okay. Your source that you use can contradict the text. It can complement the text, say the same thing as the text, contradict, doesn't have to be the same. So in developing your speech main points, what you see in a picture that I'm going to put up in the discussion board area is that you can start your main point with the text and then move to the next few sentences being about the specific example, and then a personal example. Or you can start with a personal example, move into your main source, and then the text. You can move those puzzle pieces around until it makes sense to you, and you think that it makes sense to the author. In the next area, in the next box, you'll see citing sources. In citing your specific source, you want to provide us with enough information that if I'm in the audience and I want to look up that source, I can. So if it's a book, a journal, I need a name, a title, a date, a volume, a page. If it's a television show, I need the date that you watched it, the name and the title. If you got something from online, I need the address. I need you to provide us vocally, out loud as you're speaking, enough information that I can find that source. You have to cite the text as well. Okay, so in the picture that I am providing, you will see in the third column, it says citation, cite, cite, cite. That's because every time you give me a new piece of information from a new source, you have to tell me the citation. So if you start with the text, according to our textbook, blah, 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 and then you tell me your source, so you switch to the book, Communication Power by Manuel Costello, and then if I decide to go back to the textbook, I have to cite that again. I know it sounds redundant, but if you don't do that, if you never cite any information, I think it all comes from one source. And if you never tell me a source, then I think it's your opinion. And then if it's your opinion, I don't find you as credible unless you're providing sources for your opinion. Okay, so in this, I provided you with the main point example the way I want you to do it. But in your discussion board, I just asked you to summarize the source. And it really would be good if you could go ahead and add the rest. Then citing sources appropriately, and then additional information on citation. Thank you.